Welcome back to another episode of Game Hype HQ, the show where we dive into the latest video game releases and give you our straight-up impressions. It's Alice here, and today we're talking about Avowed, the much-anticipated RPG from Obsidian Entertainment. This is a studio known for crafting some of the most beloved RPGs out there, and Avowed represents a massive step forward for them. It's probably their biggest game yet, so let's dive right in. To start off, I've been playing a preview copy of the game, and the footage you're seeing here is captured from an Xbox Series X running in performance mode. So let's not waste any time, and let me just say, Avowed is pretty fun so far, but don't get me wrong, it's not perfect. Let me break it down for you. It's good, but not great. Now, as someone who wasn't particularly wowed by the trailers for this game, I have to admit I was pleasantly surprised. It's enjoyable, but my main issue lies in the story and some of the characters. The world building, loot system, and the RPG mechanics are solid, but there's something about the way the story unfolds that didn't quite grab me. I'll explain all that in more detail shortly, but for now, let's go over the basics. The game takes place in the world of Aora, which is the same setting from Obsidian's previous RPGs, namely Pillars of Eternity. If you're familiar with their work, you know that this world isn't your typical medieval fantasy. It's got a lot more going on. There are pirates, gunpowder, rifles, strange creatures, and factions that don't feel like generic fantasy tropes. The world feels alive and rich with unique lore, which I really appreciate. A big bonus for Avowed is how it connects with the world of Pillars of Eternity. While it may seem like there's a lot of baggage from those games, Avowed does a good job of narrowing the focus, concentrating the action on the Living Lands region. This helps newcomers feel less overwhelmed and lets them focus on the narrative and setting without worrying too much about the broader Pillars of Eternity lore. The game opens with your character arriving in the Living Lands as an envoy sent by the Empire to investigate a mysterious plague called Dream Scourge. This disease has the unsettling ability to bring the dead back to life, but in monstrous, twisted forms. The Dream Scourge plague is a big deal, as it ties into the larger theme of Avowed, reincarnation, and the way gods and lives intertwine. When you first start, you create your character from the ground up, and the character creator is pretty solid. It gives you plenty of room for creativity without being overwhelming, so you're not drowning in a million sliders. You can even customize your character with godlike features, things like glowing eyes or magical mushrooms growing out of your face. You can decide how much of this fantastical appearance you want, or you can just make your character look like a regular guy or gal. As far as attributes go, you get to assign points to various stats like might, constitution, dexterity, perception, intellect, and resolve. These attributes play a big role in combat and dialogue options. For example, might increases damage and carrying capacity, constitution affects health, and perception improves critical hit chances. What I like here is the flexibility. If you want to be a melee fighter but still get some perks with ranged attacks, you can spread your points across attributes and adapt your playstyle. You can even respect your stats if you want to try something different down the line. Another cool feature of the RPG mechanics is the ability tree. This lets you unlock new abilities, both active and passive. Some of these abilities affect combat, while others are more supportive, like passive buffs. Companions also get their own skill upgrades, and certain attribute points can unlock special conversation options with NPCs. These dialogue choices are a nice touch, but they don't drastically change the story. It's more of a way to reward you for investing in specific attributes, like getting to talk your way out of a situation or unlock special lore. After the introductory section, you're thrust into the first major open zone, where you'll encounter several objectives and a ton of side quests. The game encourages exploration and rewards it with hidden treasures, environmental puzzles, and plenty of opportunities to just get lost in its world. The combat, for me, is where the game truly shines. Combat in Avowed is fast, fluid, and satisfying. It's not the most complex, but it feels a lot like an updated version of something you'd expect from games like Skyrim. Think of Skyrim's combat, but with better responsiveness and more flexibility. Instead of just spamming attacks and watching enemies slowly fall over, Avowed makes combat feel engaging. You're constantly dodging, dashing, blocking, and chaining together melee, ranged, and magical attacks. The game encourages you, making combat feel chaotic, but in a fun, rewarding way. You can customize your combat loadout with a variety of weapons, spells, and abilities. It's fun to experiment with different combinations. Want to dual-wield pistols and magic? Go for it. Prefer a sword and shield with some devastating magic? You can do that too. You can switch between two loadouts on the fly, and having the flexibility to swap between melee, ranged, and magic mid-combat is a game changer. This sense of experimentation is what I love most about the combat system. It's just fun. But while I love the combat, I do have to mention that the game's loot progression feels a bit slow at times. For a while, I didn't feel like I was getting much good loot, which can make the RPG experience feel a little bit lackluster. However, when you do find a legendary weapon or piece of armor, it feels like a big deal. Avowed has a solid loot system, with armor types that affect your stats and equipment upgrades that can be tied to your preferred playstyle. The game also encourages you to hold on to your favorite items and upgrade them over time, which keeps you invested in your gear. Exploration, too, is where Avowed shines. The world is dense, full of hidden areas and cool environmental puzzles. You'll find treasure chests behind waterfalls, caves tucked under vines, and various other secrets that make exploring feel rewarding. The game also uses its items and abilities in creative ways to help you solve these environmental puzzles. For example, you can freeze water to cross rivers or burn down webs to uncover hidden paths. These moments of discovery are some of the most enjoyable parts of the game. Now, there are a few issues that I encountered during my time with the game. I played on Xbox Series X in performance mode, and while the game was generally playable, there were some noticeable dips in the frame rate. It didn't always hold a rock-solid 60 frames per second, and I noticed occasional texture downscaling, especially in busy areas. The game's visual fidelity did take a hit at times, though not enough to ruin the overall experience. Avowed is still a visually stunning game, with gorgeous art direction, a rich color palette, and highly detailed environments that really stand out. Despite the world's visual charm, the story is where I felt Avowed fell short. I just couldn't get emotionally invested. Obsidian games are usually known for their incredible storytelling, and while there's definitely an intriguing premise here, I found myself getting bogged down by the sheer amount of exposition. The game is absolutely obsessed with lore and explaining the world of Aora, but for me, it just didn't hit the right balance. There's a lot of dialogue, and I mean a lot, and it's hard to stay engaged when it feels like the game is constantly dumping information on you. I'm all for dialogue-heavy games, and I don't need voiceovers or constant action to enjoy a game, but Avowed felt excessively wordy. The lore and story elements feel disconnected from the action, and instead of getting excited about the mystery or the characters, I found myself zoning out. Avowed has a deep narrative, but for me it wasn't compelling enough to make me care about the journey. The companions also didn't do much for me. Kai, the first companion you get, is probably the most memorable, but the rest of the characters lack the depth and charm you might expect from an Obsidian RPG. They don't feel like they have much heart, and their stories didn't capture my attention in the way that characters from games like Fallout, New Vegas, or Knights of the Old Republic 2 did. Ultimately, Avowed is a game that I really enjoyed on a gameplay level, but the lack of a gripping narrative and compelling characters left me feeling less connected to the world. The game's strengths, its combat, world building, and exploration are fantastic, but the story just couldn't hook me in. If you're a fan of Obsidian's previous work, you may have a different experience, especially if you're invested in the lore of Pillars of Eternity. So, to wrap up, Avowed is good but not great. It's a lot of fun to play, and the world is absolutely gorgeous, but the overly verbose dialogue and lackluster characters kept me from truly loving it. I think it'll find an audience, and many players will probably love the lore and character-driven aspects, but for me, it wasn't quite enough to make me feel fully immersed. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think of Avowed? Were you excited about it from the trailers, or are you still on the fence? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. And as always, if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.